let's get started with dramatizing a story through playwriting using script format. Now, I know this seems like a stretch, especially for young learners in first and second grade who are just getting comfortable with writing. This is a strategy that I've used with 6 and 7-year-olds, and with a little bit of modeling and working in collaborative small groups, they're more than capable of achieving their goal of playwriting. And sometimes we can start as a whole group and move to different student groups as we do this with the really young ones. So let's get started with our script format anchor chart. And of course, this anchor chart will be available to you alongside this stack as part of the handout package. This is our script format anchor chart, and as you can see, I've used two very well-known characters from The Lion King, Mufasa, who is Simba's dad, and then underneath Mufasa's line, we have Simba's line. And I really wanted to use something that you could use with your first, second, third graders that they would be familiar with to teach this concept of playwriting by using script format. So this looks a little bit different than what we're used to seeing in narrative format. We don't see paragraphs on the page. We see lines. Anything an actor or an actress says on stage, the dialogue that they deliver, or if one person's performing, we would call it a monologue. Anything that they say is considered a line. But actors are also very cognizant of the character's emotion and feeling, even though they don't say that out loud. Their facial expression and their line delivery help us understand how they're feeling. So let's take a look at this. We've got our character name, Mufasa, followed by a colon. You could also put a dash after Mufasa's name. And then we've got our parentheses. And in parentheses, this is going to tell us the character's emotion or feeling. So in parentheses, Mufasa feels very proud when he delivers this line. Now, of course, we're not going to read the line, as you know, Mufasa, proud, someday all of this will be yours, my son. We're not going to say the character name, nor are we going to say the emotion or feeling in parentheses. And this is something, of course, you're going to want to go over with your students. We're just going to start from the top of our line, or the beginning of our line, using our proud character voice. Someday all of this will be yours, my son. And then the next line, delivered by Simba, Mufasa's lion cub son. Simba, we have our character name, is feeling very curious when he says this line. And Simba says, for his line delivery in a curious way, even that shadowy place over there? He's really curious about the part of the Pride Land in the shadows that he's never been able to visit. So this is just modeling the strategy of showing students in your class what script format looks like in written form. And then, of course, you want to maybe give them an opportunity to write their own lines, or at least contribute, if they're younger learners, contribute to a whole class line. So for this contribution part, I tend to use text that I don't have to do any front loading on. I think we're all familiar with the story of Charlotte's Web. So I've created two lines here. Fern says in her very sleepy voice, because she just got out of bed when her father was making noise outside, "What are you doing?" And this is the part where I would ask my students, what punctuation are we missing? Let's, really focus on the punctuation, and hopefully they would tell me we're missing a question mark. And then Mr. Arable, he definitely needs a feeling or emotion, but he eventually will say, "Fern, go back to bed." So this is where I would ask my students, what do you think he's feeling, or what do you think his character's emotion would be as he delivers his line, "Fern, go back to bed"? And they might say something like angry, and of course we could write that in, and they could help me continue the scene after these two lines. Now, I don't want to leave out my teachers watching that might not teach specifically English language arts. So I've selected a different subject, in this case, math, because I feel like in science we can think about dramatizing a science experiment and writing a play about the scientific method. Or in social studies, of course, there's so many great historical events that could be dramatized, but I feel like math might be a little bit harder. So I feel strongly that if we can do it in math, we can do it anywhere. We can do it in library, we can do it in PE, we can do it just about anywhere. So I've selected the concept of equivalent fractions and numerator and denominator. And of course, this would be more upper elementary. And this would be something where your students could dramatize a story or a mathematical equation based on their knowledge of equivalent fractions and what you've covered in your unit on fractions. So this is my example for my fabulous math teachers who are watching. And this is a scene between Jayla and Aaron. And Jayla's got a problem and can't quite figure out how to solve it, but Aaron's going to help her. So Jayla starts this scene very confused. And this is taken directly from a wonderful book, which we're going to talk about in a moment. I like to give credit where credit is due. But Jayla starts the scene very confused, and she, in her confused character voice, might say, I have to paint 1/3 of this fence, but I don't know how much 1/3 is. And Aaron is very confident in his knowledge of what 1/3 is. And so Aaron says, using his confident voice, that's easy. You measure. Like, duh. And then we have a whole line in parentheses. This is way more than an emotion or a feeling in parentheses. This is what we call stage directions. And it says in parentheses, Jayla and Aaron use a tape measure, and they would use their tape measure prop, or they could pantomime using an actual tape measure when one might not be available. Or maybe they could supplement and use a yardstick or even some rulers in the classroom if you were doing this with students. Found materials are also great props. So Jayla and Aaron use a tape measure. Of course, Jayla nor Aaron, or the students playing Jayla or Aaron, nobody's going to say Jayla and Aaron use a tape measure. Instead, they're simply going to pick up their tape measure prop or something representing the tape measure to utilize it in the next part of the scene. And then Jayla continues. But as you can see in Jayla's line, and I did this on purpose, it doesn't have a stage emotion or feeling in parentheses. So I left that out on purpose. That's totally fine. You see professional scripts all over the place where not every line that the actors deliver has a feeling or emotion attached to it. So this would be actor's choice. So Jayla says, the fence is 9 feet long. And how would she know that? She would know that by measuring whatever's acting as the fence in your classroom. And finally, Aaron is going to finish our short scene today by saying, you need to figure out the equivalent fraction for 1/3. So then, of course, if I was allowing my students in math class to complete this scene, or a scene about really any math concept for that matter, they would continue to write lines until they found a good stopping point for the scene, which of course the fence would get painted, and we would know that the equivalent fraction of 1/3 when it comes to a 9-foot fence is 3/9. And they could maybe use some more math vocabulary along with their script format in their writing, such as numerator, denominator, etc. I never like to miss a writing opportunity for my students to really work with sequence, transition, or temporal words. And so we're going to craft a couple of lines today, pretending that we're working with, we've worked with English language arts, we've worked with math, let's work with science, and let's pretend that we have worked with students on conducting a very simple experiment. Something as simple as placing a bucket of ice outside and placing one inside the classroom and determining, and this would be maybe in the fall instead of in the winter, which ice is going to melt faster. And of course, using the scientific method, very young learners would create a hypothesis of what they think is going to happen, conduct the experiment, and sort of analyze their data. So of course, we could use some of these temporal words as we craft lines that go along with our playwriting using our script format, but the lines would start with a temporal word. So this is just another strategy to get you thinking about how you could use this with students. So for example, I'm going to have maybe as a example line, my first student might say, yesterday we made a hypothesis that the ice bucket outside would melt faster because it's warmer outside. And then the second student, when crafting their next line of dialogue for the play or the reader's theater or the dramatization, would choose a different temporal word. So let's go with, then we set up our 2 buckets of ice, one outside on the playground and one inside the classroom, and we let the ice buckets sit untouched overnight. And student number 1 might then deliver a second line, or we could move to student number 3 to deliver the third line of our scene, which could start with, I don't see it up here, but today we checked our ice buckets and realized that our hypothesis was correct. So again, showing how it could be used with a science experiment and bringing in some of those sequence and transition words. I also wanted to give a shout out to the author, L.E. McCullough. I found these fabulous books on Amazon.com, actually, and I found them forever ago, but I just checked, they are still available. It's 2 books in the multitude of Reader's Theater scripts available online, but I like these particularly because these are 12 in each book, 12 10-minute classroom drama skits for science, math, language, and social studies. And just to give you an idea of what's in here, this is the grades K through 3 book. And we've got language arts, including the parts of speech, may I quote that, an antonym and synonym. In math, we've got even and odd numbers and lines and shapes. Science, plays that talk about fossils, vitamins, and the planets. And social studies, we've got biomes, A Child's Day in Rural America, 1876, What a Government Does, so a script about citizenship, and also a script about current events. And in the 4th through 6th grade version, which I also love, different scripts. We've got apostrophe, writing a poem, homonyms and homophones, the metric system, fractions, which the short scene that I selected for our math demo a little bit ago was from this book right here, the Now I Get It series. In science, magnets and energy, and in social studies, time zones, governments of the world, and recycling. Again, these are just 2 of many you could find on a site like Amazon or even in your local school bookstore or library. Tons of Reader's Theater scripts. Make sure you peruse through them, of course, for language and for accuracy. I ran into a situation where a 5th grader brought me a fabulous, I thought at the time, Reader's Theater book about social studies events and historical events. And there was one on Christopher Columbus, and the very first line that the narrator delivered said that Christopher Columbus was born in 1952 in Australia. So always check for accuracy and, of course, for developmental appropriateness.